I'm Professor Lieu. Welcome to our live stream. I'm joined today by art prof teaching artist Lauryn Welch, and we have a special guest artist today, Chuck Welch, who, as you might have guessed by now, is related to Lauryn. Chuck is Lauryn's dad. So this is a family affair that we were having today. And today we are going to talk about mail art, as both Lauryn and Chuck are mail artists, and it's an incredible community of artists that we're going to talk to you guys about today. If you would like to grow as an artist and you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof: critiques, tutorials, and professional development. To get started, Chuck, could you just explain what is mail art?
Well, the basics of mail art is communication by way of the international postal system. You need a sender and you need a recipient. You need a stamp and an envelope or a postcard or a mailer. And you can send pretty much anything that your imagination can desire, which might include, as an example, 25 feet of garden hose with 1-cent stamps from one end of the garden hose to the other. And if you're really kind of sculpture-like, you might want to make a little seahorse to attach on the end of the hose. That will get.
And so I know mail art is really not just one artist sending out stuff. It's a whole community. Lauryn, can you explain how that functions?
Yeah, what is really wonderful about mail art is it was kind of like social media, like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter before all that existed. It started in, well, as we know, it started in the 60s, and a whole bunch of people, artists and self-taught people mostly, got together and started sending each other postcards with collages, stamp sheets, pieces of artwork to each other, and they really developed these super close-knit relationships. And those relationships from way early on, from way back then, they even exist today over 40 or 50 years, and that stream is still going on. There's still new people coming to it and being a part of this giant constellation of artists.
And so, Chuck, when did you start doing mail art? Were you a student in high school, or is this something you started doing as an adult?
Yes, I was a teacher in Bellevue, Nebraska. I taught high school, and I felt a bit isolated. I was living in Omaha in the center of the country. I had a hand paper mill in my basement, and I did that in the summertime. I made stationery, and I also made sculptures out of handmade paper and stamps from handmade paper. So I was a young teacher, and I wanted to get out into the both West and East Coast art happenings. So yeah, that's basically where it started. It started in the center of the country.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's really grown tremendously, that this is all over the place. Lauryn, can you talk about maybe the reach of mail art?
Yeah, it is super, super global. Wherever there's a reliable postal system, and even where it's not so reliable, you can have mail art. And actually, mail art was the way that I got really interested in art prof, because growing up in a rural area, growing up in rural New Hampshire and having family in Nebraska, you're not in an art center. And that's what art prof's all about, is for people who are either socially or geographically or financially isolated from the art world. We want to offer a place where they can do these things. So mail art was the first area that I really saw this. All of these self-taught artists from countries like as far away as Japan or Australia or India, or I think we even got some mail art from Kenya once. And they can, as long as you can afford the postage, which can be expensive in some places, but if you're sending a postcard, that's like $1 internationally, you can send that wherever you want, and you can get something back, get a piece of mail art, piece of correspondence back from someone, which is super cool.
Chuck, can you explain how the mailing part works? Like, do you send a mail to anybody and then they have to send something back to you? Like, how do you decide who to send the mail art to?
Well, I entered a mail art show. There's something like 40 or 50 going on anytime, any month of the year. And these shows usually are based on a theme. The theme could be test the postal system. Like you could send a laminated $10 bill and see if it gets to San Francisco. You would find these shows listed in art magazines. Art Week magazine on the West Coast is how I got started. An Umbrella magazine. Neither are in existence anymore, but you can get all of that information online now through IUOMA. But that's how you start. You send, there's a theme, you send anything goes. And then in return, you get a catalog. These days, in the analog days, you'll get a catalog through the mail, but more often today, you'll see it online because it's very expensive to make a catalog. And, so you go down this catalog list and all the names and addresses are there for you to send a postcard to each one of the people on the list and see who responds. And that's how I got started in 1978. I just went down the list and there were 200 people in the show. It was in Santa Rosa, California. And about a third of the people responded. And boy, was that a surprise in my mailbox. And that's how I came up with my pseudonym, Crackerjack Kid. I was eating a box of Cracker Jacks at the lunch table, in our kitchen. And I've had some mail art and Cracker Jacks. I don't know if anybody remembers them. You get them in ball games, they're a box. And they have a toy, a free surprise inside. So I thought I'll put a surprise in every mailbox.
Actually, tell me in the chat, those of you guys who are watching right now, when's the last time you got something in the mail that was not a bill or junk mail? When's the last time you got something that was a personal note? Because I really think what's interesting about this is that the role of postal mail has really changed over the years because of the internet. So, Lauryn, in some ways, do you think that makes mail art have even more weight because it's more unusual now than it was 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's definitely shifted in good ways and very sad ways. It's not what it used to be, and that is because our primary mode of communication is online now, which is fine and actually makes it easier to enter the mail art stream because there are addresses for other mail artists are really accessible, and they're going through social media sites. There are mail art groups on Facebook, on DeviantArt. My dad mentioned IUOMA, which stands for International Union of Mail Artists, and we will provide a link for that later. And that's where you can find many of the projects and the exhibitions and things that are happening right now that you can send mail to and get addresses from. So in that way, it has become really easy to be a part of, but it also has become, I guess, a little bit more decorative because it is not a primary mode of communication. It used to be this thing of great resistance. It subverted governments that shut down, that didn't like correspondence, that censored people. It played this really important role in the, I guess, political system. So it's just different now.
We have a comment from Bean who says, I just stalked Chuck's Instagram. I used to live in his neighborhood. I used to work at the Sargent Center for Outdoor Education in Southern New Hampshire. Small world. That is really cool. My goodness. Well, I'll tell you guys, I never get fun mail. My mail is always like, pay this. I just feel like that would be such a lovely experience to have again, because I don't get handwritten letters like I used to when I was a kid. And we've got some comments from people in the chat. Oh no, Typo says, I always get one from my mom, but it's in care packages. Johnny got my snail mail art, which, by the way, is a Patreon reward. So if you guys want to get snail mail from me, you can sign up for that. And this is really cute. So Tanley says, my 83-year-old dad likes to send me a letter once a year or so. And Tammy says, last week, a mini portrait from an artist I patron, loved her decorated envelope, made me so happy. So how does that make you feel, Chuck, when you get all these pieces of artwork? What is the emotion like? Are you just a kid on Christmas morning? What is it like?
Actually, that's a good analogy. Opening your mailbox is like Christmas. Well, that's kind of a saying about mail art. It's a big surprise oftentimes. You don't know what you're going to get in the mailbox. I mean, I got a shoe that was mailed from Vermont not too long ago. And I'm supposed to add on to this. A lot of times the artist expects that maybe you'll do something more to it and mail it back. Those are called add-ons. So what am I going to do with this pair of shoes that were tied together by the shoelaces? Can you imagine delivering that? By the way, my mailman knows who I am. Okay. So I get some unusual things. And it's evocative. Some people call it pen pals, but I think it's even a little bit more than that. And that you get to know the people as from their art that they produce, and it becomes collaborative in that you create together in forming a work and you pass it back and forth. I've sent postcards that have gone to Europe, to Asia, to Australia, back to me, and we've done this round robin, 80 days around the world in 80 days, for example, is a concept where you keep the image going and you have this palimpsest of layers of added on images. So when it returns to you, it can be something magical, completely different than what you started off with. You can do this with small groups of people, 2 or 3 or a dozen. You create your own little network in no time of people that you have sensibilities, be it audio art exchange. If you're an audiophile and you like to do things with audio tapes and stuff, and analog cassettes, I think those are kind of still hitting back, that kind of thing. You can pick your own area that you're interested in and find your audience.
Yeah. So, Lauryn, both you and Chuck have mentioned to me in the past sending all types of objects through the mail. Lauryn, is there a place where you can find out, is this okay to send? Like, I honestly don't know. Is there something on the USPS website that tells you what you can and cannot send?
So, yeah, the USPS service or your government service in your country does have, when you go to the post office and usually on their website, will tell you the things that are not okay to send. Usually these are things like lithium batteries or super perishable goods or live animals, things that are, they're fireworks, guns. These are not things you should send. That being said, one of the interesting things about mail art is really testing the postal system. Part of the experience is seeing if that weird object that you sent actually gets to the place where it's supposed to go. There is a slide in here of a piece of underwear that was made out of paper, I think. And I think that there was some law about not sending undergarments or not sending underwear through the mail. Yeah, this was in Russia. I think Chuck knows the whole story, but basically you want to see if those rules actually exist, if they're actually followed. And that is a whole area of mail art, is how reliable is your postal system and how extreme is your government?
Chuck, what is one of the strangest things you have ever sent in the mail?
What? Handmade paper underwear. You're not. I sent that to the Soviet Union because I had a booklet on what you can't mail there. This was in the late 80s, just before the Berlin Wall came down. And they were very stringent about what you could or couldn't send. So that particular one that Lauryn just showed was sent to England, but I made others. And one of the things you couldn't send to the Soviet Union was undergarments. Yeah, underwear. You couldn't send underwear, and so I did. But I've also I've known artists who've sent like eggs, like addressed an egg and put a stamp on it.
Like a cooked egg or a raw egg?
A raw egg.
Did it make it there?
You would believe, I mean, the post office, the United States Post Office they're my heroes. The postman is the hero of mail art. These people are the most magnificent, dependable, employed people in the government. And they handle all kinds of it. You'd be unbelievable. It used to be you could send live animals. You could send chickens, and this is back in the 1920s, I think, or 1930s. You'd be surprised at what you can send. I had a student that sent a 4.5-foot long plaster shark. He called it Jaws, and it arrived in a high school in Pennsylvania, I think.
Well, so speaking about plaster sharks, are there any rules, or is the whole point to not have any rules? Like Yellow Heart Studio is asking about size. Is there a particular guideline there?
About 108 inches on the girth. You can't have something too long or too wide, but there's a lot of room to play with, in regard to size. But yes, there are restrictions. By the way, you can't send dirt to Canada.
I do want to make a note on this, Dad, because I feel like the rules are very much related to how well you know your postman or woman or person, because I think it's extremely variable and has a lot to do with who is right there in front of you serving you or working with you. So even in terms of cost, if I know my postal person really well, they'll give me one rate for mail and I'll be charged a totally different rate for the same mail in another location where I don't know that postal person. And it's not necessarily illegal or whatever. It's just they are making a different judgment as far as what is in the box. And I think similarly, a piece of mail art, as far as how crazy you want to go, it depends on how much trust you have between your postal person, which is so it means like you need to be invested in your community, in your relationship with your civil servants, your government postal workers.
Especially today, if I can interject something here. I mean, during the pandemic, postal workers really are risking their wellness by doing hand deliveries and working at the counter there. But yes, it's good to get along with with the postmaster of the town where you do your mailing. As I said, I've never had any. Usually, what I do is involve the clerk in my work. I ask them to cancel my stamp a certain way. I'll make stamps, rubber stamp images and postage stamps, about the size of postage stamps. I don't always put them in the same place. I mean, I put the stamps in corners where instead of the upper right-hand corner as you're supposed to do. The postal clerk doesn't really care. He said, okay, this is fine, or I need a certain denomination of stamp or a particular commemorative stamp that fits the context of the artwork. And he'll go out of his way to find a stamp for me. There may be a line behind me, and he's very tolerant. So the people behind me are always kind of curious. More than often, I've had people stop me in line and say, what is that you're carrying under your arm? Can I see that?
It's always really fun at the post office. People get really involved in it because it's not something we see every day.
Yes.
You've got a comment here, Clara. What is that?
Yes, W315 is saying, do you always pass on what you get in the mail, or do you sometimes keep it? And if so, how do you display it? So what do you do, Chuck?
That's several questions.
Here, we'll keep it up so that way you can refer to it.
I have a whole archive of objects that are in my basement. I have them in banker's boxes. And
How many? How many pieces?
how many pieces have I saved?
Yeah.
I probably have about 30,000 pieces of mail art I've kept.
How many artists is that?
Well, I have archived 1,600 and closer to 2,000 artists around the world, from 55 countries around the world on 6 continents, all except Antarctica. So yes, oh yes, you do keep the. It's hard to give some of these things up there or pass them along, but it's a good idea to not be too attached to what you send out, and always try to send the very best you can, because it kind of try to evoke the recipient, do something with the work that entices them to respond, or spend some time with your work. And if you like to draw, draw your best. Or if you're a photographer, send something that will evoke a response. And if you're really interested in concepts in art, you might think of ways to involve other people in one idea that can get passed around.
Yeah.
We have a question from Valerie who's saying, can one send non-enveloped items? This is a question for you, Lauryn.
Yes, you can. And they can be totally strange, or they can be very, they can be anything from, say, a can of soup. That has been something that Chuck has sent. Or they could be this mail order shark. I had someone try to send a telephone that came through. Let's see. Someone sent a cardboard house with just a whole bunch of postage stamps on it. We had this show recently, last March at the Sharon Arts Gallery, called Errors, Freaks, and Oddities, which is a philatelic, a stamp term, a term for stamps, people that collect stamps. And this was an open call for any kind of mail art. And this is where I got some totally strange things, from weird x-rays to paper mache objects to copier art, stamps,
Yes.
all sorts of things. Chuck was a part of this show, so he can vouch for the variety of things that were sent.
So I will say that there was a question earlier about the work that's sent to the shows. Do you get the work back? Usually, no. The person holding the show promises to send something in return, i.e., usually a catalog. So where does that work go? Some of it goes into my archive. In this case, the work was to go to the Smithsonian Institution. So
yeah,
it's good not to be too attached to what you send. Do your best, but it's not meant to be a kind of thing that you it's so precious to you that you would feel awkward about mailing it.
It's a gift.
It's a gift. Very good. Yes, a gift. Yeah.
We have a question from Valerie who's saying, how can I get the art club at my school involved with mail art? That's a great idea. I know that high school art clubs are always looking for stuff to do, and I think this would be fabulous. So Lauryn, what would you suggest they do to get this started at an art club?
Well, actually, I think this is a really good question for Chuck, because he's done it several times when he was teaching high school. So maybe he can give his answer and I can give the millennial answer of it.
Okay, I'm happy to answer that one. I loved teaching art when I was a high school teacher. I had the best students in the world. My art students helped me put together 3 national high school postal art exhibitions from 1979 to 1981. And The third one was exhibited in the National Education Association headquarters lobby in Washington, D.C. And what I did was I created a network of other high schools around the country. Uh, the third one was the largest, 78 high schools in 38 states. And we had actually a high school in Australia too that was involved. And what we created was a network of art students taking a 2-week class in mail art. And the teacher then would have the students send their work with, they pay for the stamps, the school didn't, but they mail what they created to other students that were on a list in another high school. It's a great, actually, community relations kind of a thing because it brings schools together. Schools in the same town or across town or in the next state. It's good to start off small. I would recommend you go with maybe 3 or 4 high schools. But I just think it's a great way to bring art conceptually into the classroom. You're bringing the avant-garde through mail art into the classroom. And you can do this on the internet as well, of course. You could have both sides of that form of networking art among one another. So there's so much to be learned. Students, and actually I had artists who were mentors assigned to different high schools. There were 100 male artists from around the country who agreed to be a mentor for a particular high school. So these were artists that were avant-garde artists. They were neo-Dadaists from California, and artists who were into surrealism and into book art, into sound art, creating zines, underground publications, rubber stamping, art stamps, artist stamps, postage stamps.
Yeah.
So there were all kinds of different forms of art, and these mentors were really in the forefront of the mail art movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is really interesting, having a mentor and someone who's already in the mail art network helping these students, because one thing that I think a lot about in 2020 is privacy. I think that student privacy is a lot bigger issue now than maybe it was in the 70s and 80s. And so this question from Spud actually is similar to this privacy issue. How secure is it to post out your address to random people, though? Is that something to worry about? There are some ways around this. First, I'll speak to students, and then I'll speak about larger, involving your personal self outside of a school. So for students, what we did for the show back last year in March is that it was opt-in first. Not everybody had to send things, and they also did not have to put a return address on things. They could just send things to the show if they wanted to. When we posted the online catalog, we put the first name and the last initial, and then we included the city, but not the full address. And so you can, if that is a issue that you really want to bring up with parents, you can create a kind of permission slip for the stuff. I realize it is very important. Also, working with other high schools as opposed to random artists in the mail art community could be an option, where you come up with a sister school, and then people that are really into it can go to the mail art stream outside of that later. If you are an individual outside of a school that is sending or wanting to do mail art, one thing that is really helpful is getting a PO box rather than using your physical address. And that can help. While it's still going to probably be within your same area because you need to get to your PO box, it won't be your actual address. It'll just be a place where you can pick up your mail at the post office. I think that's the best way to help with security. I would say that within the mail art communities, as far as I've seen, as far as I've experienced, and I've been in this, literally since I was born. I have not had an experience in my 29 years where someone has, I guess, like gone after me for my address, but obviously that is something that you want to be mindful of course. So I would also stay within those mail art community systems like IUOMA, or people that you feel like you can trust sending out your address. Do it through direct messaging if you feel uncomfortable.
That's great advice. Very good advice. I couldn't have said it better. You can always refuse your mail too. In all the years I've had, I mean, you can imagine if one of you received Ray Johnson's navel from me, you might not want to respond.
Yeah, what is this piece here, Dad? What is this? Can you explain this?
Navel casting, I make paper by hand, so I would cast a person's navel with plaster. You, of course, put petroleum down, around your stomach first, and then you take these boxes that would hold oil paints, small box with a frame, and you have them hold that around their navel, and then you pour the plaster. It sets. You take handmade paper pulp, you create a sheet, and then you stuff that water. This sheet is kind of like dough, actually, and you push it into the mold, and then put it in a microwave. And you've got this wonderful casting. And I have to tell you that I think that navels are as interesting as a person's face because they're as unusual, and there's no two navels alike. Each navel to me is like a thumbprint. So it's very hard. I've only had a few people though where I had navels that were outies. I don't know why. I mean, so I had a festival in New York City in 1985 when I was an MFA student at Boston Museum School. I went down there with a bucket of pulp and went up to this flat on the west side with a friend. There it is. There we are. The avant-garde of the New York City art community were there, and we got together after John Evans's exhibition in New York, and there we are in front of the New York Naval Academy piece of artwork I did. And behind me, we're all holding, covering our navels. But these four guys were in it, and yes, we all had to lay down on the floor about the same time and remain still for 15 minutes while the plaster dried. It's a very funny thing. If I had men and women there, it'd be all just be for this flat, and in this big room, and I got a photograph of it. It's not here. You would probably laugh a lot if you saw it, but terribly awkward for some, and just outrageous. There were a lot of giggles, and and I made a stamp sheet out of it. You saw that just minutes ago. So I did one with the West Coast too. I wasn't there on that one. I knew a group of neo-Dadaists out there, and they had a swimming pool. They went to Fox was his last name, I think. Lon Spiegelman, Bill Gaglione, a lot of important West Coast mill artists did a Naval Academy right by the poolside in lawn chairs.
Yeah, I think this is the really important thing about this is you can create community bonding amongst your mail art network by putting together these performances, having these kinds of performances that end up in a physical artwork, not just making an artwork for someone and sending it to them, but having a activity that you do together, or an on-sending where you're adding on to something, or just a project with a couple rules that you can subvert is a really great way to get to know your community and maybe even possibly meet up with them. A lot of these people were not people, Dad, that you had known originally. They were people that you met because you did mail art with them and then ended up going to a convention or a happening or a mail art project together with, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So, they call them mail art congresses. They happened during the middle of the 1980s. And these artists wanted to start meeting each other. So they kind of traded in their postage stamps and paid for airfares. And we had 250 congresses around the world in 1992. 250 that all occurred over a period of a year. We had documentation on all of this stuff, and everybody had their own event, you know, in Copenhagen, everywhere,
So,
Paris.
Chuck, can you talk to us a little bit about the media that you work in? We know that you cast navels now, but looking at these other images, there's a lot of collage, there's printmaking, and Lauryn, I know you as well do a lot of mail art yourself. So, Chuck, can you just talk us through some of the supplies? Because we do have this tutorial on visual journaling, which has some similarities to mail art, but how do you know what to work with? Is it just whatever is around, or what do you do?
A little bit of all of those things. Um, I've collected rubber stamps through the years. I get industrial stamps and other. I've carved stamps. Lauryn has too. I kind of started out in that area that interested me in mail art. I read a book about rubber stamps, and so I met a bunch of rubber stamp artists early in the late 70s and stuff. But I also work with book art. I do a lot of collage. That's kind of my main media. I work with stencils. I'm a printmaker by my training in graduate school, and of course a paper maker too. So I have a lot of different skills I bring to my postal art, and so as far, the handmade paper was very important to me. So I used to have a paper mill where I could do a lot of different things with it then. But you can make paper in your, in your kitchen, actually, if you want to learn how to make paper, and use a food blender. And you can actually even take your jeans and cut them up into really tiny pieces. And I actually made wedding stationery for a couple in Omaha who were just getting married. It was her favorite pair of jeans or something, and they made wedding stationery out of it. I just made it, pulped it up, And,
Yeah. So, Lauryn, where do you get inspiration for materials for your mail art, which we're looking at right now?
Yeah, my mail art practice is very different from my painting practice. It's kind of a way that I let off steam, similar to how I do those marker drawings, except usually I'm also working in collage and rubber stamping. This is probably really just very much inspired by my dad, since I've been in his studio since basically I was born. Those are the materials that were around me. So I do the same thing. I save a lot of papers, a lot of magazines, art forum. I use markers, stickers. I've got a ton of stickers. I think that's really popular in mail art. And I stick to mostly things like postcards. I do some letters. I love making cardboard puzzles and sending the pieces in separate envelopes, so you only get a few at a time, or I'll take things from other mail artists that have been sent to me, and maybe it's a prompt, and I'll add on to that prompt and send it to a different mail artist. There is a thing that maybe some of our Zoomer generation people might not know about: fax machines. Fax machines.
I remember those.
Fax machines were huge in mail art. Xeroxing. You could make a ton of invitations, or you could make a ton of an add-on type thing, a chain letter, and send that to a whole bunch of people. And you can still do this with your printer. You can take a picture of something you've made or stick it in your printer scanner and then print out a whole bunch of something and send that off to someone. So, we also have a typewriter, and I love to use my typewriter for things because it's so hipster. It's so antiquated, reminds me of the old days. So these are all things that I use in my own mail art.
I should say, I would like to add that if you have deep pockets, you should go pick up art off the ground. Anything that you see that is interesting, any kind of trash. In fact, there's a whole group of mail artists on IUOMA who are, they're called, as Trash Po, is the media. Trash Po, trash post office, whatever. And you find they pick up the most unusual things, and they trade that through the mail exposed or as collage. a lot of mail art is found art, is found
Yes.
objects. You know.
I would have to say that's a really good point. One of my favorite things when I was a kid that you got in the mail were these jars that were full of found objects like pennies, little plastic soldiers, dice, tickets, all these random trash things that you would find on the sidewalk. That's hard to do when you're living in New Hampshire. I mean, it's not trash post, it's just like nature post at that point, and then it all turns to dust because it's all organic material. But now that I live in New York, I really want to create one of these jars that's full of the random refuse on the street because they're beautiful. They're so good. They're so precious. And that isn't, yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the trash post thing because that is definitely an area that I want to enter into.
You'll find trash anywhere around the world, but New York City is especially a nice place.
Yes.
Where I did my MFA work. But yes, I was actually going to a show of the pop artist Red Grooms.
Yes.
In New York City. We were going to his opening. And it was a Sunday morning before this show that we were going to. And I was looking for junk on the sidewalks, walking near an alleyway and look, you'll never know who came down the street towards me doing the same thing. It was Red Groom. I knew he looked like him. Red, how you doing? There was nobody on the streets. It was a early Sunday morning. Everybody sleeps in New York Sunday morning. So he said, "How did you know my name? And what are you doing?" Oh no, just a little story.
Well, it looks like we've got a lot of old equipment in our audience. Oh no, Typo says, "I have a working fax machine in my house right now." Starving Artist says, "Still have my old IBM typewriter from the 80s in my garage. Inspired to fish it out now." And Megan B says, "People still fax at the library. When we got rid of it, we had to bring it back because the people were not happy. The people demand faxing." Very cool, you guys. Well, if you guys enjoyed seeing Chuck's work, you can follow him on Instagram. The link is also in the video description below. Our Prof has a podcast. It's available on Spotify and also on iTunes. And in a few minutes, Lauryn and I will be hanging out in the Art Prof Discord and the post live streams channel to talk more about trash and fax machines and typewriters. The invite link is in the video description below. Subscribe to our channel and join the Art Prof family. And thank you to our top Patreon supporters. Keep us up and running. Thank you to everybody for your contributions, your questions about mail art. And of course, thank you so much, Chuck, for joining us. We loved talking to you about this and getting a chance to see your work. Everybody, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.